Hey everybody, Rich here, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. Kind of a dreary, yucky day outside today, so we're going to do a little something in the kitchen. Wife's been pestering me for a while to do a video on uh, wraps, so we're going to do a video on wraps today. But before we get started on that, let's get a real quick update on feeding bananas to bees. Since I have a banana with my breakfast every morning, I took the banana peels out yesterday and put them in the uh, rapid feeders. Just the peels, because the peels actually are higher in a lot of nutrients than the meat of the banana is. And this is what that was yesterday, and this is what they look like today. So they've been skinned down to just the barest bit of skin, which according to the details, all it can turn black and get too hard for them to eat very quickly. But as you can see, they were really after them. The hive where these came out of was far more interested in what was going on than the one where these came out of. These were both put in there the same day, just in two different hives. And even down at that point, the rapid feeders looked like they had been infested with cockroaches or something because they were chewing up bits of the skin. And if you look closely, you can see the chew marks on the skins, even as they're still going, even though they didn't have much to do with them. So they are quite enthusiastic about the bananas and the extra nutrition that they're getting from them. This is a good thing. So, at any rate, back to the wraps.
First of all, what's a wrap?
Wraps are pieces of cloth impregnated with wax that are used like cling wrap or something. If you had one that had it, I don't happen to have any wraps at the moment. I'll tell you why in a little while. But if you can put it over the top of a jar or something like this, if they're properly sticky, they stick to themselves like a clean wrap, and they make a cover for a jar that has no plastics or anything like that in it.
So it keeps plastic out of the landfill.
It keeps plastic out of the landfill. It keeps materials within plastic from leaching into food. Leftovers don't last long enough around here for that to be much of a problem, I don't think. But anyway, whatnot. Actually, as I've mentioned from time to time before, one of my hobbies is buckskinning, colonial recreation. And everybody thinks that corks were used an awful lot in the colonial period. And actually, cork was very expensive and wasn't used all that often. There were other ways to get around these things. It's something I've done a lot of studying on. But a lot of small jars and bottles were covered. I mean, they didn't use screw lids like this, and this wouldn't be a screw type, but they would always come up and have a lip like this, and that's because there would be a piece of wax impregnated cloth or oil impregnated paper that would go over the top and be tied with a piece of string. Uh, and that's actually my main use for these things is some of my spice bottles and things like that when I'm doing the recreation. Mine are covered with pieces of waxed cloth, which was appropriate to the period. Uh, so when I first went to learn how to do these a few years ago, did some research online, watched a lot of videos. I was very dissatisfied with everything I saw. I worked out a method that worked well for me that resolved most of these issues. So the other day when I decided to do this video, I went online again, and it appears that most people have figured out the same things I figured out. There are a lot better videos out there right now than there were a few years ago. So this is kind of redundant, but it's just me doing the same thing everybody else has done. So here's my technique. All right. The first thing, and one of the most important things, is that the cloth that you use to make these needs to be really thin. We're talking cutting up old shirts. T-shirts oftentimes are too thick, but if you got an old button-down shirt or something, that's usually like the right thickness of material. You don't want thick material, no flannel, anything like that. You're not going to make a successful wrap that way.
Any kind of cotton?
Pretty much any kind of cotton. 100% cotton is what's necessary for all these. You do not want
No polyester, no rayon, no acrylics.
no fake materials here. It has to be 100% cotton or 100% linen or 100% linsey woolsey, I guess, whatever. But 100% cotton is your norm, and it needs to be very thin material. Okay, so let's go over some of this very thin pieces of material. This happens to be granny squares purchased at Walmart because I'm lazy. So, this is like $1 or something. So like get 8 of these little pieces, 2 of each, obviously. Uh, you need, the main thing you need is not just the amount that you're going to make, you need a lot of extras. And you'll understand that why when we get to it. If you're going to make 4 wraps, good to have 8 available to you. You may not make 8, but you'll probably end up making at least 6. So at any rate, lots of extra materials, cut to the sizes you want, and they can be 20 by 20 and anything down from there. They can even be circular or whatever. But you want your material, do it my way. I went to the thrift store and I bought an old iron. As you can see, half of the Teflon coating is worn off of this one, so I paid like $3 for it or whatever. But an old iron helps greatly. Now, it's funny, people said, oh, a disposable brush because once you've used it for wax, you won't use it for anything else. Well, guess what? This has been used for wax for 6 or 8 months. This is somebody who did something once, because if you have your brush impregnated with wax when you're done at the end of this, next time you throw it into the pot of wax, it'll soften right up and be ready to go again. This is not like paint. Yes, it gets hard really quick, but it gets soft and usable again. So just, you have a dedicated brush, but it's not single use.
But you can also use that brush to paint the inside of your bee boxes with propolis, and
which is exactly what this has been used for. Whether it had propolis on it or whether it had wax on it, I use this for propolis work. I use this for painting the ridges on frames, whatever. You of course want parchment paper, my favorite thing, as you always know. Some masking tape, because it's a whole lot easier if you tape the piece of parchment paper to your what do they call
cookie
this thing?
sheet.
Cookie sheet, thank
or
you.
baking sheet.
Yeah, baking sheet. An oven, set at your lowest setting, which in this case is 175. That's fine. I do have a dehydrating setting, which is less, but anything you put in there is only going to be in there for a couple of minutes. You'll be monitoring it, so 175 is fine. And a double boiler with your wax in it.
So a double boiler is simply a pan with water that you put another pan or a bowl into.
Thank you, dear. And with this step, one of the most universally useful things I own is a set of stainless steel chopsticks, because you put your pieces of wax in here and you spin them around with the chopstick. You can use it for fishing, anything else. And when you're done, you just do that and it's clean. It isn't dedicated to this use. I can go out and have sushi with this tomorrow night. Not a problem. Okay, so let's get started, because the method is the most important part of this. You will see some people say, put it on here like this. They use that little particles of beeswax. They sprinkle around it. Others will tell you, take your block of beeswax, grate it onto here, spread it around, put it in the oven so it'll all melt. Yeah, you can do any of those you want. If you don't like this idea, you can do that. All that's necessary is that you get a fair amount of beeswax onto your material. You're going to get too much beeswax onto your material initially, and that's fine. That's just where we're starting. But the main thing is, by whatever method you wish, let's just get some beeswax onto the material.
So I notice you're leaving spaces in between.
That's because I never was very good at drawing between the lines.
Oh, that's not intentional then.
Yes, dear, it was intentional because it looked good for the optics.
Ah. Is it important to get it right to the edge?
Not terribly, but you don't want it too far away from the edge because you don't want to work harder than you have to. And of course, the nice thing is when you slop over the edges onto the paper, you can recover all that and recycle it later on. So here we are with a piece of material with way, way, way too much beeswax on it for this purpose. Oh, I should mention something. Uh, I made a whole bunch of cloths last year, and I took them to Rendezvous with me, which is where you do these reenactments. And on my trade blanket, I put them out. And this one lady came up, and she took one look at mine. I mean, she started going, and she's like all through here with them. And it's like, and she declared that these were the best wraps that she had ever seen, and that she used nothing but wraps like this in her kitchen, and that she had spent $20 for 3 wraps on occasion and had never seen anything as nice as mine. And she bought every one of them I had in one shot.
So clearly they were underpriced.
Yeah, I had clearly had mine underpriced, but I was quite flattered. Okay, so let's just pop it in there for a second because while we chatted there, it kind of got warm. Let's just give it a second. Let that soak in a little bit. Da, 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 da. I could, I guess, waited to now to do the banana stuff, but I didn't. But I'm thoroughly enjoying the bananas. But we're definitely, like I said, it's been a drizzly, miserable day yesterday and today both. And wow, the bees have gone through their sugar really quick. If you're here in South Florida, folks, and you're getting a lot of rain, be sure to check on your bees. You know, you don't want them starving or anything. I'm not too worried about that. I've been in the upper chamber of all mine, and they've got plenty of stores, nectar that hasn't been capped yet and such. But they do get a little cranky.
So you're just warming that up.
Yeah, just wanted to make it a little more uniform. Okay, so at any rate, the best way that I found to thin it out was like this.
What's the iron set at?
High.
Okay.
It really doesn't matter. And it's like, yes, in just a moment's time, I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper on top of this. Not just yet. The reason you can get away with it for a minute is because you just want to get that heat on there. The best way, you want the minimum amount of wax possible in that actually saturates the material. Hopefully, when I take the top piece off of this, we'll see some slightly dry spots on the lower one so that we have some correction to do on that.
Is that because thicker wax will crack?
Thicker wax will crack. You actually want just enough to impregnate the cloth itself, not really leave much of a coating on the surface. Now, something I've seen with a lot of the videos here lately is that actually there is somebody who's making a formulation and will sell you the beeswax formula to make these. It's like 1 part pine rosin to 4 parts wax to 1/4 of a part of jojoba oil. And other people are using coconut oil, and other people are using other oils and such. And I can see where that would be greater in flexibility, but if you were a little bit off in jojoba oil, and nothing would stick to itself, and all kinds of other things. But plenty of other people are online saying that, yeah, they've done all that, and they've gone back to just making them out of straight beeswax.
Oils eventually turn rancid no matter how good they are.
Yeah, unless it's mineral oil, but I don't think mineral oil would help much. There's not much heat here. What's going on? Oh, you know what?
Did it turn itself off?
It turned itself off
well,
while we were waiting.
The newer irons do have an off feature. They turn themselves off.
I had this thing hot. Oh, there we go. Now it's heating up again. There we are. All right.
You just have to pick it up and wiggle it a little once in a while, and it won't turn itself off.
So Grandpa
Like
thinks
wiggling
it's,
your mouse.
I was saying, well, Grandpa thinks it's still alive.
Right?
Sorry, we used to raise snakes, and there's a.
Don't go into it.
I gotta wait a second here anyway. So there's a Gary Larson cartoon in which there's a bunch of pythons sitting at the dinner table, and the mother one says to the little boy Gary sitting next to Grandpa, Gary, wiggle Grandpa's mouth so he thinks it's still alive. It's just a
snake joke.
It's a snake joke, but yeah, it's eating up.
As if people will not think you're weird enough at this point.
Yeah, well, I keep 250,000 stinging insects in my backyard as pets. That's pretty much the. There we go. Now we're getting it. That's pretty much the definition of weird.
So this is actually what you want to look for when you're doing the ironing.
Yep.
You want to see the wax coming through.
I want to see the wax coming through into the next piece. Anywhere where there's excess. I mean, it's just like if you're curing an old cast iron pan again, and they tell you you really want a thin coating of oil on it. You basically put a little bit of oil on it, and you keep wiping it away and wiping it away and wiping it away, so you wouldn't think that there could be any left, and then you've probably got it about right. Yeah. Put that right over there.
So you picked up the top fabric and you flipped it around so you can even out more of the beeswax.
Yeah, well, I saw a lot of extra wax on the underside, so I looked where I had a spot on the next one that didn't have too much. I'm going to slip this in here for just a minute. I'll put it up here.
Keep it at a steady temperature.
Well, I don't want to start cooling down. And
is the water in the bottom of the double boiler on simmer, or is it just on low?
It's on low simmer at the moment. It was on a good boil earlier.
There's quite a bit of wax on the paper, as you can see.
Yep. But there's getting to be a whole lot less on anything else, as you can see. Okay, good. So I'm going to put this back on here for a second and run over it. And with any luck, I'll have a couple of spots on here that aren't wet enough. And I'll show you what you want to avoid. If my technique is too good and I don't have them, I have to keep doing it until I do it wrong.
It looks like it's fairly evenly distributed.
Yeah, darn. I did it right. So
show people what it looks like when it's right.
Yeah, I guess. So as you can see, it's nice and flexible. Let's let this cool a little bit. That's what people online say, oh, you got to rig up a string and some other things. This stuff cools in about 30 seconds. So let's just let that one cool. We feel the one we were using.
This one, I think there's
spots. You can see the edges aren't too great as yet because there was no attempt. Remember, no wax was put on this one at all. It was just absorbing the excess from the other one. As you can see, it's pretty stiff, but the edges could use a bit of work. That spot's a little on the dry side. Not enough to see though, I don't think. Anywho, we'll just.
It does seem like there's some lighter spots there. Are they missing a little bit of wax, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you see this little spot here,
yes.
It doesn't have quite enough wax on it. Now let's just There was a spot too right there. Okay, you see that spot right there?
Yes.
That needs a little more wax. But that's the main part of the technique, is that once you've done that first one, you're just going to keep on building them. I mean, I'm getting enough on here, but just barely enough, because that's what you want, is just barely enough. Should have moved that out of the way so I didn't have wax on the top. But then again, I'm not getting yelled at for using this iron because it's my iron.
It has your name on it.
It even has my name on it. So we just.
So now we're going to repeat the process.
Repeat the process, and this one doesn't have a whole lot of extra wax on it like the first one we did because this, didn't really get painted so much. So this one will actually dry.
But you can already see around the edge, wherever you painted wax on, is where it's coming up as extra.
Yep. So I don't care what method you use to saturate that first piece in particular. This is the way I like to do it. I just like to paint it on. Yeah. I'm wondering why I'm not seeing more dark right there. Is there a reason for that? Let's see. Ah, good. So, as you can see here, we have a piece that, while it is impregnated more on this side, is not actually coming through too much on this side. This one.
So now would you call the bottom piece done?
No, because I've got a slight dryness here and I've got a thickening of wax right here. So, if I can see that. Perfect. All right.
So now that the other one is cooled,
Now the other one is cooled.
we want to take a closer look at that one.
Yeah. It's just this is driving me nuts. Get rid of that.
You can use pinking shears around the edges, and that will help eliminate cotton from fraying.
That's a recommendation. Okay, so now that this is cooled, see this light edge right here?
Yes.
That doesn't have quite enough wax on it. This is more likely a trim job because this is actually fibers that aren't all together there, referring back to your pinking. And again, we need a little tiny bit of wax there, little bit of tiny wax there.
But would that work on a jar at this point?
Oh, yeah.
Would you like to demonstrate?
Okay. There we go. Now, the thing is, I don't think they ever work all that great, but that's the way it works. And if you put a rubber band on it, or in period, if you were to put a piece of string on it, or you just wanted to go for that colonial effect at home.
That's it. And that'll never end up in the landfill.
No, because
you just
for one thing, every 6 months or so. Okay, so here's a few things. You never really use these to cover meat products.
Put that in front of you when you're talking. It's easier. Thank
so
you,
if you've got, a tray like this or something and you're using this, don't use it to cover meat products. because you can get bacteria on it and such. You can't wash these in hot water. You lukewarm to cool water with just a mild soap. Dr. Bonner's is probably one of your ideal. Castile soap is an ideal soap for doing this. Not really detergent soap or anything out. These are going to wear thin in about 6 months or so if you're using them pretty regularly, at which point repeat the process.
Oh, so the thin refers to the beeswax coating, not to the actual fabric.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, if they wear thin in the sense of they're not sticking so well or anything like that, just go back and redo them. It's refreshing them is doesn't take much, obviously, and if you ever do get to the point where you're ready to throw this one away, it's still not going to put in the landfill. You roll it up and you use it in your smoker. Hello. I'm doing this for beekeepers. Okay, well, if somebody else sees this video and wants to do it,
I'm going to add something to that.
Find a beekeeper and give it to them.
I'm going to add something to that.
Go ahead.
When that becomes too worn out to use on the jar, in other words, the fabric itself is getting too worn, you take it and you use it for furniture polish.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oil-based furniture polish, something with orange oil in it or something.
Yes.
Because orange oil and beeswax is a wonderful furniture polish. Yeah. Yeah, you're quite right. You could do it that way. So this was a top sheet that, got some use from it. So now what's actually going to happen to these pieces is they're going to get cut into about 8 pieces from each one of these sheets.
And where are you going to use them?
Because I've got a whole bunch of small apothecary bottles.
Ah.
And I'm going to make covers for a bunch of small apothecary bottles with a piece of string and put those out on my trade blanket at Rendezvous.
Which brings me to my next question.
January. Mm-hmm.
How much extra fabric do you need or do you recommend to have around the opening? Because I see sometimes when people sell them, they'll have like a whole foot, 12 inches by 12 inches of fabric, and they'll recommend it for, say, a 4 or 5 inch bowl.
Well, as you can see, there needs to be a good amount of overlap. This isn't, you can't get away with 2 inches like you can with cling wrap.
I see.
Yeah, you would need a fair amount of overlap. There's plenty of online sources for getting standard dimensions, 7 by 7, 9 by 9, 11 by 11, 12 by 12.
And just so people know, if you find a bolt of fabric, it's cheaper buying fabric by the yard than buying it pre-cut.
In most cases.
And then you can cut it
in the case of these little granny squares, it was pretty darn cheap.
Yeah, but then you can cut it to whatever size you need, and multiple sizes if you want. I'm just throwing it in there because I sew. And not everybody who watches this channel will sew.
That's true. That's true. And a lot of times you will find they have some pretty good sales on fabrics, 50% off and all this other stuff. But almost all of that stuff's going to be way too thick for doing this. This is really better done upcycling old button-down shirts or very plain cotton t-shirts. Like the double knit material like this, not so much.
Too heavy.
It's too thick. You're going to keep too much. It's like I say, t-shirts, not so much because they're double knit usually, but button-down shirts,
the kind that you can get for $1 at the thrift store.
Yep.
Just double check the label if it's still attached to double check if it's cotton.
Make sure it's cotton, because a lot of times the stuff won't be. Yeah.
Any particular way of storing these once you're done?
They recommend that you not store them folded. And I should mention, there's an hole in the area. So beeswax gets what's called a bloom on it. A block of beeswax, properly stored, sitting there doing its own thing, temperature controlled area, but if you don't do anything with it for 6-8 months, you go to take it out, you'll see this gray substance on the surface of it. That's called a bloom. It's not a problem. You throw it into your boiler and you melt it down, that all disappears. But if these have 100% beeswax on them and you put them in a drawer and you bring them out, you're liable to see a gray fungal looking coating on them. It's actually just bloom. It's an oxidation. It's not a problem. Uh, you might want to pop them in a low oven for a few seconds. I mean, and literally it's just a matter of a few seconds and it'll go away. Now, uh, I do want to recommend something to you. Oops, chill on the surface there. You know, they're just talking about using Dr. Bonner's soap on these and such. Well, University of Florida, they were figuring out best ways to store honeycomb, empty comb, and they came up with a 5% bleach solution to dip them in. All right, and by that they mean 1 cup of Clorox in a 5-gallon bucket of water. That's a 5% solution, and you can always use that. Dip your cloths in for a few seconds, give them a rinse, hang them by a clothespin to dry, and you should be good to go in terms of bacteria, anything like that. I would highly recommend something along those lines rather than just relying on soap and water to clean them. Okay, but
you can just store them flat in a drawer.
Store them flat in a drawer. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to store them. I mean, you might want to cut some pieces of parchment paper like this, or throw a napkin in between them or something. But I'm thinking parchment paper would be a good way to do it, because your other alternative would be
because they might stick together.
Yeah, because otherwise your alternative is to lay them on a piece of parchment paper like this and roll them up.
Oh,
okay, take up less square area and such.
Right.
That works too, just so long as they're not sticking together.
So can I ask you another question?
You can.
Why is the oven on?
Just in case I needed it.
Oh, okay. So that wasn't actually part of the
It doesn't
process.
really, there's nothing work with my process too much.
Oh, but you're saying if people use the shaving method for their beeswax.
Well, and you can see, like, I can pop it in here like this, leave it for a few seconds, and let that stuff equalize. I just prefer using the iron.
Oh,
it's faster.
So you don't actually have to use an iron. You could do it that way.
I think that in the end, you do kind of have to use the iron because you need to be able to press them.
And distribute the beeswax.
Yeah. But I mean, if you wanted to use the iron and a rolling pin or, a wood slicker or something, and, pop them in the oven, bring them out a couple minutes later, rub them with a slicker, or imagine a silicone spatula. That would work too. We'll try that in a second. Just fun. I've never thought of that, but this might just be that might be a good technique as well. Hey folks, even at 175, don't burn yourself. Now the oven is just there to act as a backup in case I needed it for anything. Yeah. Okay. I still prefer the iron. I mean, it's a very modest investment to keep family tranquility. You can promise your wife you're going to clean it after the fact, but you know what? They're never going to believe you. So just go to the thrift shop and get yourself one. Okay, with all your recently gained experience, where are our dry spots?
Okay,
see one
on
there,
the edges.
See one there,
Yep.
See a little bit right
Just
there.
Just along the edges. I don't see any dry spots in the center to speak of.
Yeah.
They look pretty even.
And that one is just good to go all the way around.
Yeah, it looks good. I mean, call me lazy, but I don't think I'd bother to do it around the edges because the edges aren't going to ever be in contact with the edge. So,
well, there's that. And also, these weren't pre-trimmed, so
I would definitely use picking shears around the edge, but I would do it prior to the beeswax.
Mm-hmm.
Because wax and pinking shears, it's probably not going to help your pinking shears stay sharp. And that way you can actually use your wife's pinking shears on the fabric and she won't yell at you.
Yeah. But at least we, oh, that did, I left that sitting on top instead of sitting in it. So it got hard.
It's going to drip.
Look at what a mess that is. But I guarantee you that next time you want to do this, a few seconds in the beeswax and it'll soften right up again.
Looks awesome. Is there anything else you need to tell people?
Well, let's see. I touched on the fact that a lot of people are now doing this with formulations that use some pine rosin as well. And I'm going to try that experiment sometime. I just haven't done it yet. But, yeah, that solves that. So there you go.
Those are really nice. And your other one looks good too. Now, so you've got a total of 4.
Yeah.
In very little time.
In very little time. And it would have been a lot less time if I wasn't chatting about the whole thing. And, you can really get quite a production line going. Once you've made that first piece, and it's, you put too much wax on that first piece and you started the process of sucking it up into the next one and sucking it up into the next one, sucking it up into the next one, you can just keep going. That's why I say always make sure you have 2 or 3 more than you want to make, because somewhere along that line you've got to call it quits and leave a piece that isn't maybe 100% finished.
And you know what else? I think these might make really nice holiday presents for people.
No, I don't think so per se. But
why?
If you're giving a jar of honey, using one of the honey jars, not a honey bear, but if you're giving a jar of honey as a present and you've got the regular cap on it, but there's nothing to stop you from then putting on a decorative cover and doing it with a piece of waxed material. Now, that doesn't mean they have to keep using it. You've got a good screw lid on this. You don't have to use this on that. But it's like, oh, wow, and I've got a piece to use for something else. It's like a little secondary present. Yeah, I don't care if she could use it for a jam or something like that too, of course. But yeah, I think it's cool. So there you go. It's Rich. This has been South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. Be sure to like and subscribe. And hey, share these videos with your friends. We're coming down towards Christmas, and hopefully I'm not going to wait till Christmas Eve to give you a really great tip. So, this is the time of year we should probably do a few crafts videos for things that might be useful around Christmas time so that you have time to plan and prepare for them. So goodbye for today.